This time, it's my favourite type of input, Braille Screen Input. Hooray, I love this one. Now, this is a bit more exhaustive than some of the other recordings because there are a few things we have to do to make Braille Screen Input work. I'm just going to go through those briefly and I'll demonstrate the way not to run around screaming. Ignore the background noise. We aren't professional here. We're all happy families. So, Braille Screen Input, firstly, is configurable in several parts of the settings system. So we're in the VoiceOver settings here at the moment. And there are three areas you need to go to get this working properly. So let's go from the top here.
Commands button. Act voice tap one. Double tap. Learn more. VoiceOver. Speaking rate. Speech. Braille. Orbit reader.
Now the first section is Braille, and this is where
output.
You will choose your type of Braille, so contracted or non-contracted, or in old language, I suppose, grade 1 or grade 2 Braille. There's also a Braille tables section in here, and this is where you can decide whether you want to be using UEB or as a standard English Braille or anything else. Actually, there's even a table in here for Unicode Braille characters, which is what you would use if you wanted to write Braille for sighted people. So you could theoretically send somebody a text message composed of Braille characters and they could see it on their screen. So all that is addable in here. Not to mention, of course, I probably should have mentioned these first, all the other languages that people speak. So if you're doing Braille in French, Spanish, German, whatever else it may be, there is doubtless a table for you in here. You can add them there and then you can switch between them on the fly when you're Brailling. So this is your first stop. And there are different sections for input, output and Braille Screen Input here. So in theory, if you wanted to,
Braille heading output contracted
you
button.
could have your output as contracted, so that's what you would read on your Braille display.
Input contracted
You could have
button.
grade
Facebook.
1.
Now.
It will ignore Facebook. You could have grade 1 on your Braille display.
Braille Screen
and
Input
then you could
contracted.
be typing in contracted again on Braille Screen Input. So you can really vary and be flexible as to what you have in here. So that's the settings in the Braille section of VoiceOver settings.
Braille Orbit reader. VoiceOver
then
recognition. Verbosity. Audio.
in
Commands.
the
activities. Rotor button.
Rotor, we've already seen this screen
Selected.
before.
Braille Screen Input.
As you can see, my Braille Screen Input is selected and it's at the very top. And this is important because for me, I use this all the time. I want it right near the top of my rotor, and we'll come to that in a minute. So if yours is not selected, which it won't be by default, then make sure you double tap on it and tick it, and then use this slider to drag it up to the top of your screen, just so that it's always handy if you're going to use it regularly. That's the second place to go.
Rotor button.
And then finally,
Rotor act typing
in
button.
here,
Always speak
Is it in
typing.
here?
Typing style. Phonetic feed typing feedback button.
typing feedback.
Software
and
keep
there's a
hardware
section
keyboard
here
Braille Screen Input heading.
next to that heading there underneath there with options on what you hear when you're typing in Braille Screen Input. Now I currently have this on words, as you can see, if you can see,
Nothing.
but you can choose nothing.
Characters. Selected. Words. Characters and words.
So we'll put it on both
Selected. Characters and
for the
words.
benefit of this demo.
Typing feedback button. Drafts 4. Text
That's
field.
all we need to do.
Is editing.
We are now in
Character
our
mode.
drafts
Insertion
typing
point at
app
start.
ready to go, and we've got a conventional keyboard
Use the
on the
rotor
screen.
to access misspelt words.
So to bring up the Braille keyboard, we need to simply use our rotor. Remember, this is the act of using two fingers or one finger on each hand to twist that little dial, make that turn gesture like you're turning a little wheel. And when you do that, let's see what happens.
Braille Screen Input. Orientation locked. Landscape. Home button to the left. Screen away mode. Contracted.
Okay, there's quite a few bits of information here. We heard landscape, so that means we have to use our phone sideways. We heard home button to the left, that tells us which way to turn our phone. We heard orientation locked, which means that my Braille keys won't jiggle around the screen. We heard contracted, that means we're writing in grade 2 Braille. All things that I want to happen. I've chosen to lock my Braille keyboard into the screen away configuration, and so I'm going to spin my phone around now. So my phone is now held in both my hands, and this is quite hard to describe, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So I'm holding my phone in both hands. The short edges of the phone are left and right because the phone is now sideways. So my little fingers are encroaching along the long edges of what is to me now the bottom of the phone, and my thumbs are along the top, which is the right hand side in normal parlance. which leaves my 6 brailing fingers free to touch the screen. So the phone is held with the back of the phone facing me, with the screen away, which is what VoiceOver said. I'm gripping it in both my palms, or not quite my palms, a bit further out than my palm, I suppose. The bit of your hand, I don't know the word for the bit of your hand where your fingers are, not the palm itself, but the bit beyond the palm where the ridges of your fingers start, the bones of your fingers. You can feel them when you flex your fingers, in such a way, anyway, that the left 3 fingers of my left hand and the 3 fingers of my right hand, the keys that I'm going to use to Braille, are extended to hover over the screen. And because I've locked my orientation, I can hold it in this position, or I can turn it so that my fingers come down onto the screen. So either I can Braille into the screen, or I can tip the phone flat with the screen pointing up towards me, if you like, and Braille down onto the screen, whichever way I feel more comfortable doing. So that's that. Next, I have to calibrate the dots. To do that, I simply tap my right hand and then my left hand on the phone. So I'm doing a double tap, effectively, but I'm using 3 fingers at a time. So I'm using my right hand and then my left hand. And if you listen, whoops, if I just be quiet, you.
Dot 4.
I'm just going to put the phone down a second. I'm just going to double tap with both hands on the back of the phone, and I want you to hear the speed at which I double tap. I'll do that again. So that is my hands separately, right, left, 3 fingers, that speed. That gives all 6 fingers contact with my screen at the right time, and that tells the iPhone where my fingers are going to be when I Braille. Let's do that now.
4.
So I'm picking the phone up. Ignore what it said while I'm just touching it by picking it up. I've repositioned it. I'm going to do the calibration double taps, and you will hear iPhone say...
Dot positions calibrated.
There we go. And I can now Braille.
At.
The reason it said at when I pressed A there is because I'd already accidentally tapped on dot 4. So let's just get
Stopping Braille Screen Input. Portrait. AA at. Orientation. Dot positions calibrated.
So now I can use my left hand.
A.
Left hand 2 fingers.
B.
Left hand 3 fingers.
L.
So that's the A, the B, and the L on my left hand. If I use the index and ring finger on my left hand,
K.
I'll get a K. If I use my 2 index fingers, I should get a C.
C.
If I use the first 2 fingers on both hands, I should get a G.
G.
And if I use the index and ring fingers of both my hands, I should get an X.
X.
Fabulous. That's calibrated. Now, there are no buttons here. I'm typing on a completely flat surface. So whenever I go over a bump if I'm in a car, or whenever I fall off my horse if I'm riding around a village on a horse, or whenever I walk into a lamppost if I'm talking and texting at the same time and walking around and not paying attention, I will have to recalibrate. Right hand, left hand, 3 fingers at a time, tap tap.
Dot positions calibrated.
That shows the phone where you are. And one of my party tricks when I show this on an iPad is to stand up in the middle of a big crowded room with a big screen behind me and cross my wrists so my hands are sort of upside down and tap the edges of the iPad and move the dots to the corners of the screen. It looks really cool, and I can Braille upside down. It looks funny, but the important point as as somebody who wants to rely on this for serious text entry is that you learn to calibrate your dots
Dot 6.
quickly.
Dot 6.
I can just as easily put the phone down lying flat on the table here, do the same thing, tap tap.
Dot positions calibrated. Space.
And now-
and space J.
Whoops.
Dot L. Dot I space B K. Dot L space Braille. Q space S space fast.
Now, it was talking with letters and words there, so you didn't see that.
New
But
line.
the idea is...
B space but the space the I D E A space idea S space is
that you can Braille
T space that Y space U C space can B R L space Braille
rather rapidly
R space rather A P R D L Y
if
S
you
Y
want to.
Z full space that
Whoops.
that T O full space 2.
There we go. So I'm using some more gestures here. Obviously, I'm not just pressing letters. I'm flicking right once for a space.
Space space
And left once for a backspace.
space space
It's saying space because it's deleting the spaces. If I braille some letters,
A, B, C, D,
flick right once,
space, act,
then flick left.
space, D, C, B, A,
If I flick right with 2 fingers,
new line,
I get a new line. And if I flick left with 2 fingers,
2, want, you, if, rapidly, rather,
it deletes the words. If I braille a word that I'm not quite happy with, let's say that I wanted the word plants, but I misbrailed the S.
P, L, A, N, T, Q, space, plant,
Oh dear, that's plant. I meant to braille an S, but I slipped a dot. If I flick down,
plants,
it gives me a suggestion. And it would also give me
plant,
one plant,
plants, plant, plants,
and then
plant,
that's why I typed originally. It doesn't spell these out, which is perhaps a slight oversight. It would be good if it did spell them out, wouldn't it? You've got to listen very carefully.
plants,
And a down finger flick, and then
space,
it changes the suggestion based on what you've entered. So that's a flick up and down, moves you through suggestions, a bit like the auto type replacements, I suppose. The iPhone doesn't do any auto caps or auto replacing for you in Braille, so you've got to do it all yourself. But it really pays to know your UEB. So when we were doing the dictation demonstration, we did a hashtag that said very cool. Well, in Braille, to do that, you'd have to go
hash, V, E, R, Y, C, O, O, L, space, hashtag very cool,
like that. So that's a UEB hashtag and a capital V and a capital C. So yes, okay, in that instance it's perhaps quicker to say the words hashtag very cool than it is to type it. But if you're a Brailleist, this is unimaginably cool because you've got the privacy, you've got the speed, you've got full access to all the UEB. So if you need to write mathematical symbols or scientific notation, you can do that. You can do accented letters. You can even
space, smiley,
do smiley faces. So really, really powerful stuff. I should probably talk about the screen away and the tabletop modes. The iPhone, when you haven't locked the dots, will switch between tabletop or screen away depending on which way the phone screen is facing, and indeed whether the home button's on the left or the right. So when you've found an orientation that's stable for you and you've got your fingers in the right positions, you can lock the orientation as well, and then that's what I've done, so it always stays in that way. You can use screen away mode on a table, as I've demonstrated by the fact that I'm using it on a flat surface. Obviously you can't very easily use the tabletop mode with the screen away because it will detect that you've moved the phone and change it around. So stick to one, I would advise, unless you're in a position to recalibrate all the time. You can also some apps let you send or perform an action with your Braille keyboard still active. So for example, in the Messages app, you can send a message without leaving the Braille keyboard. And then when a message comes back in, you can have it read to you automatically. VoiceOver will speak it as it comes in, and you can just type and send again. So in that sort of situation, if you're having a conversation with somebody, you don't need to leave the Braille keyboard. You can leave it open. This also works in certain instant messengers like Threema. It works in the Colloquy chat client, and it works in Madurama, which is a client for playing online computer games, text adventure games. And it also works in Frotz, which is the offline text adventure game app, which we'll also have a video on this channel if you haven't seen that one, because it's really, really good fun. So if you need an app to practice your Braille in, you've got several there to choose from. And the gesture to perform the send action is a 3-finger flick. So when I've written my text, I flick down with 3 fingers and that text gets sent on its way to whomever I am talking to. And sometimes, rather than having to look on the screen for the send button, I find it easier to keep the phone in portrait mode, rotate to Braille Screen Input, swipe right with 3 fingers and rotate back out of Screen Input, because that performs a send in a lot of apps as well. It doesn't do it in all of them. In email it cancels your message, which is very annoying at time of recording anyway. But in a lot of apps it will do a send for you. Now, I haven't exhaustively covered all the gestures. The whole point of these videos is you get a brief overview of what the system is like, and of course then you are able to go and find more information if you want to. Hopefully this has provided you with some insight into the Braille Screen Input system. If you're a Brailleist, it's wonderful. If you're not, it's useless, because you need to know enough of the Braille code to be able to input. As with dictation, You can't amend anything here. You can delete what you've put in, and you can put new lines in. That's about as far as it goes with Braille Screen Input. You can't go back and edit what you've done. But it's a really, really potent tool. As a Brailleist, I use it every day, not just for writing 2-word answers to text messages as well. I'll be honest with you, and I use slide to type if I'm only writing yes, thanks, or no, sorry, or next Tuesday. But if I'm writing anything longer than a sentence or two, and up to the length of 4 or 5 paragraphs, I will happily bring out the Braille Screen Input, put the phone on my knee, or hold the phone in my hands if I'm standing up, or on a tray or table in front of me, wherever I happen to be. And it means I'm inputting at a really good speed. One thing I need to point out before I go, if you're doing this on an iPad, the calibration gesture is different. On an iPhone, to calibrate your dots, it's a double tap with your right and then your left hand. So left 1 tap, right 1 tap, with those 3 fingers. On an iPad, it's a 6-finger double tap, both hands at the same time. And I'm assuming that's because the iPad can sense more fingers at once. So that's one of the differences. Also, on an iPad, you can have 8-dot Braille, which you can bring in your little fingers to do computer Braille if you want to as well. I don't think any of the iPhones support that. The bigger ones may. Mine's an iPhone SE, and I've never needed to Braille more than 6 dots at a time, so I don't know much about 8-dot Braille entry on the iPhone, but I know it's possible on certainly on some iPads and perhaps on some iPhones as well. For me, I know I've gone on at some length, so excuse me, but it is my ultimate input system. It's my preferred tool of choice. The act of rotating to the keyboard, of calibrating my dots, and of brailing is just instinctive, and it's natural. And it takes no time at all. And to exit the keyboard, you simply rotate back to out of your rotor again, opposite
Portrait.
to how you came in. Or you can scrub, you can do that 2-finger scrub gesture, whichever works best for you, and you're back in your normal input method, your normal screen, rather, as soon as you're done typing. And that's it. That's Braille Screen Input. It's my favourite. I love it. I hope I've given you a taste, and I sincerely urge you, if you are a Brailleist of any sort, even if it's only grade 1, to at least give it a try, because one of the big pitfalls of moving from a button phone to a touchscreen device for me was the typing, and Braille Screen Input has dramatically improved the situation for me, and I wouldn't be very happy without it. I think it's amazing.